All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to the January 12, 2015 work session. Work sessions are a more informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on work session items. Tonight, we have 2 items on the agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. If you wish to speak, you're required to fill out a public comment card and turn it into the city clerk. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of each item. Once the item is called, no other public cards will be accepted. City Clerk, are there any public comments for item number 1?
There are not, sir.
All right. Will the City Clerk sound the agenda item?
Our first item this evening is discussion of health insurance benefits for elected officials. Mr. Sam Traeger.
Good evening. Thank you very much for letting me speak on this. First, let me apologize for our broker, Todd Bryan. He was planning on being here today, but he has the flu, and I told him that there was no reason to bring that into City Hall. So I asked him to stay at home. But he did send me some information trying to get back to the points that you were addressing at your last meeting. I think one of the 2 issues that I wanted to bring forward, and Todd addressed it, was the issue of how do you differentiate between one person's claims, and can that be tracked and sort of keep the council rate different from all other employees? And Todd's answer to that was no. Blue Cross looks at our group as a whole. I think as Chris mentioned, they send sort of large loss data. They'll tell us how many people had claims that exceeded $25,000. They don't identify those people by name, simply by diagnostic code and how much that is. For example, the last report I saw we had was from October of 2014, and we had 3 claimants who had exceeded $25,000 in claims. Running some quick math, those 3 claimants also accounted for about 33% of our total claims against the plan. So really it's the old 80-20 rule, but magnified in our case to much more. So there is no way to track that. Council members would come in and they'd be, if they have current coverage, they'd be covered for all of their medical claims going forward. So there's no way to sort of pull out that data. The second issue that I think y'all wanted addressed was, what are other cities and counties doing? Todd represents quite a few cities around the area. Dave, would you put that up, or do I have it? That one, thank you. He represents quite a few of the cities around the area. The one that he doesn't represent, when I looked at his list of clients and felt was pretty pertinent to us, was the city of Roswell, so I included Roswell in this as well and what they do. As you can see, of his clients, it's 60-40, those that offer benefits to their council members. Johns Creek, Sandy Springs, City of Suwanee, and City of Milton do not offer them, but you can see the other 6 that do offer those benefits. That includes all benefits: health insurance, vision, dental. And you can see in that final column out there, how are they paid? All the council members pay the exact same thing as all other employees. So they pay employee rates for coverage in each case. Off the top of Todd's head, he hasn't heard of a council that approach, but he certainly understood and appreciated where y'all were with it. So pretty simply, that's the presentation that I had for you and the data I wanted to bring back for the work session. Are there any questions that I can answer?
So are you saying that the cities that don't have it don't offer it? Cities that do, in comparison here, they offer it in addition to what their current compensation is. Is that right?
They offer it to the...
Like as a council member, what we were talking about was, we get something for being a council person, but instead of it just being cash that it is, we can take that and pay for the benefit out of that, rather than just get into that. Is that so? They are not doing that. Basically,
they're not doing that. What actually the other way the plan design is in these other cities is the council members pay the same rate as though they were a current employee. So
Gotcha.
It's supplemented by the city or county in a couple of cases to offset some of the expenses. So they don't pay the full ride.
Yeah, we don't want
I guess. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Matt.
Mel, go ahead.
I understand completely that it's legal. It's cool to do. Other people do it. Were we not? Did we not have a provision at one time in our charter that allowed for this?
I do not know the answer to that. We can certainly look into it
Okay.
and see, and compare to the charter and
Yeah, I'm
see
just
if
curious
see if it addresses
if we
it.
did, why it was
Yeah.
potentially.
But I
removed or
don't know
changed.
the answer to that.
And my other concern is potentially adding, 0 to 20 dependents or whatever you want to call it onto the plan, may have some impact on the overall premium that may cost others in the plan, their premium to go up and the contribution for the city to go up. So those are my concerns.
Yeah, and I think, Sam, what you were telling us a little bit at the beginning of your discussion here is that we would have no way of knowing what goes into, because I guarantee you the rate's going to change. I'm pretty sure it's going to go up, regardless of what we do.
Regardless of whether
because
you're in
that's
or not,
just the
it's-
history of insurance programs.
You can pretty much
so
count on
there'd be no
12%.
way for us to discern what percentage of the increase was due to the fact that you had a different set of participants, and so that's
Too many numbers in the pot.
exactly it's a mixture. Okay. Anybody else, Karen? You good?
I think.
Besides the charter issues, is there anything else you want me to address or anything to bring forward again? Any to-do items on this?
I think on to Bert's question, the way I understood it, I think at the very beginning there was a line item in the budget for additional benefits above and beyond the actual compensation that was allowed for council. But at the time when it was originally brought into the budget, I think that was next, is what
So it's
happened.
more of a budgetary.
It was a budgetary item, but also it was a principled item. I think everybody in the council did rightfully so disallowed the additional benefit on top of compensation. And this would be more of a compensation replacement option is what it is, if that was the case. And whether it's the right thing to do, for us to decide, we'll look at that, but I think that's where it's coming from. So,
Karen, do you remember, since you were the one that's been here the whole go-round?
Yeah, I think Matt's correct. It's the way it was originally written, there were some council members that thought that was going to be a benefit for them, that it was going to be city-provided
Okay.
insurance. And I think we very quickly, most of us on the council felt like that it's one thing for the city to provide it, it's another thing for the city to pay for it. So we did not want it to be an additional cost to the city for anyone who wanted to be on it.
Thanks.
I guess if there was direction, obviously, it's not a rush on the issue. We're just deciding whether it'd be a good thing to do or not. But when the gentleman is healed of the flu, maybe he can come back at some point in time and just kind of give us an idea of what those numbers would be for if there was the risk we're all weighing is whether or not there is a additional cost to the city taxpayers, even though we may be paying for it out of our own pocket. What would that be? And I think that's the question we don't really know. Obviously, I think Councilmember Longoria is right that it'll go up. How much is the question we don't know. If there's any way we can get those numbers, that would help.
Well, the bad thing is you will never know whether or not it went up because of a council member claims or not, because that information is protected.
Yes, it is. And
But
to
It could
sort
go
of-
down because a council member claims, and you would never know that either.
From an
Not
underwriting
claim.
standpoint, I'm not sure how they can really project into the future sort of what that might be either.
But there's
But I'll ask Todd and see if he can sort of differentiate that for us.
I'm sure they have some quants.
His professional opinion, I think, is what we're
Yeah.
kind
Right.
of thinking and looking towards.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Exactly. All right. City Clerk, are there any public comments for item number 2?
There are not, sir.
All right. Well, would you please sound the next agenda item?
Our next agenda item is discussion of impact fees, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Bill Ross of Ross and Associates.
I'll start first, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Just to give a little background, we, as you know, hired Bill Ross and Associates. Bill is here tonight with his colleague, Paige Hatley, and they have both been working on the assessment report, a copy of which you all should have received. Bill is here to give you a presentation on this report. In order to accomplish this report, we have met with all of the directors of the city for those departments for which we're looking to collect impact fees to establish level of services. In addition, we have represented tonight at the front table members of the Impact Fee Advisory Committee, which is a required entity that by state law must be formed to review the process and the reports and the program as we move forward. So in order to engage them and inform them as to this process, we have invited them to participate tonight in the workshop. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn the podium over to Bill Ross, who will give you a briefing and an update on where we are. And we're about halfway through, actually, just to give you an idea. Okay?
All right.
Bill.
Thank you, Kathy. I think for the record, I have to say I'm Bill Ross with Ross Associates. And what we have for you tonight is a briefing on this assessment report. I would like to recognize Paige Hatley. Kathy mentioned she's here. She's a member of the team, and frankly, she did most of the work. So I get to stand up and get all the accolades. But I also ask Paige to jump up anytime I make a mistake and let me know. Also, where's Michelle? Michelle McIntosh Ross has also put a lot of time into this project, keeping us straight, arranging meetings, reviewing reports, et cetera, coordinating with department heads, and of course the department heads themselves have been very involved in giving us the information we needed to put together for this report. This is a preliminary report, an assessment report, and in a nutshell, the purpose of it is to decide the extent, which facility categories can we move forward on. And the bottom line is we certainly recommend you move forward on all four because we've got the information we need to move forward. They're the categories that you had indicated an interest in the first place, and I think we're looking for your concurrence to go to that next step. And I'll talk about the next steps a little bit later. I think you also received a briefing paper. This is not to dissuade you from reading the full assessment report itself, particularly if you suffer from insomnia, can't sleep at night. This report will help you a lot. But there's a lot more in the report than in the briefing. But I think that we'll cover most of the important parts. Now, I'm a little handicapped because I can't point. So I'm going to have to describe where I am. I just went to the page with the photos in the briefing paper. And this sets out... Oh, I can at least do that part. There we go. Yes, we're on this page. What we're trying to do or accomplish with this briefing is to review the growth forecast for the city out to 2035. So we're covering a 20-year future period. We want to confirm with you the level of service standards. Most of these are standards that the city has already adopted. The listings of future projects. Most of these projects come out of plans that the city has already adopted. In other cases, we've sort of projected needs forward. Confirm that the four categories we're looking at are in fact the four categories you wish us to continue to study in more detail with regard to impact fees, and ultimately to authorize that we proceed forward with the impact fee study itself, which we call it the methodology report, but that that's one of the next steps that we'll talk about. We have pages that sort of summarize the various categories and chapters in this report. The forecasts, we make forecasts of population, housing units, and employment in the city for the next 20 years, because these forecasts establish the level of service, the needs for future facilities to serve future growth. A note on the population projections we made. There are appendices in the assessment report with regard to population projections and all the analysis we did there, as well as households, housing units, and employment. They go to great length to explain what we went through. But here's the deal on population forecasts. Every statistical trend analysis we projected forward resulted in a population greater than you have the capacity to accommodate that growth. Michelle was very helpful in figuring out, well, how much land do you have that's yet to be developed? Given the density policies, the conservation policies, the zoning ordinance standards, you can only accommodate so many more new housing units and therefore so many more people. So in spite of these projections, some of which just went off the chart, in spite of these statistical projections, we said we're not going to grow more than the land you have available under your policies. So basically we took that build-out population and said we're going to get there in 2035. So I took the lowest statistical projection of population and limited it to the maximum that you can really grow on the land you'll have available, and of course meet your goals with regard to conservation lands, parks and recreation, trails, etc. So this population, by the time we get to 2035, or maybe even before, but by the time we get to 2035, when you get to 61,580 people, that's it. Which is okay with me, it's okay with you. But I just wanted you to know that we didn't just take a projection that went off to the moon and adopted it. This, in fact, is a realistic number with regard to the city's policies as to how it anticipates growing in the future. We were a little more generous with regard to job growth. And it's still very limited. We're looking at a grand total increase of getting from about 7,700, 7,800 people who work in the city today to about 13,000 over 20 years. But we were influenced somewhat by your transfer of development rights program, in which folks can also use those TDRs for non-residential growth, and we thought that would actually help a little bit with regard to the projection. This in essence is the high statistical projection for the city with regard to growth. And of course, in the so-called North Fulton Super District, which includes Alpharetta and Johns Creek, they're going to continue to get the vast majority of non-residential new population, new employment growth in the area. But you're still going to grow at a faster, quote, pace than they will, and you will increase your share of employment in the North Fulton District from about 7% of the total today to around 10%. They're filling up, but they're still going to add 21,000 more jobs compared to your about 6,000 or so. But you actually increase your total percentage of the three cities collectively. I'm just going to keep going until somebody has a question. The The next chart just sort of compares you to the North Fulton area. And the little red bars are Milton, the blue bars are the entire North Fulton Super District. So that includes the other two cities as well as Milton. And you can see that you're actually growing a little bit faster with regard to percentages. You're just starting with a much lower number. And employment, again, will not be very much, but you're still going to actually increase your percentage as part of the whole metro, not metro area, the North Fulton Super District area. And I keep referring to the Super District because that's an area defined by the Atlanta Regional Commission with regard to their transportation planning and their forecasts and whatnot. So as you'll see in the appendix with regard to population and employment, we start with those regional numbers. We then show how ridiculous they are and proceed to adjust them to some form of reality. But I think ARC was projecting for this North Fulton district a population in 2016 that was less than what you had in 2010. So they were a little bit off, I think. Parks and Recreation, these are the sort of little summary tables. Each public facility category has its own chapter. For the level of service, now the level of service is to what extent do you have facilities that serve the population in the city, and to what extent will you serve new growth in the future? And there are several different ways that is calculated depending on the facilities. But we started off, of course, with the Parks and Recreation Plan that has level of service standards that you adopted in it. With regard to how many playgrounds do we need per X thousand people? How much land do we need per X number of people? Now we had to translate those into housing unit standards because the adopted standards all have to do with level of service based on the number of people, the population. But when somebody comes in to build a house, we charge an impact fee for the housing unit. So we have to convert those level of service standards into a number of acres, number of components, number of miles of trail per housing unit in order to be able to eventually calculate an impact fee. But we use the adopted standards you already have in the Parks and Recreation report for that. Now that plan goes to 2025, but in terms of the actual level of service, we could calculate a 2035 level of service, but it will also mean that more park and recreation facilities are needed by 2035 than are planned for 2025, and this report accommodates that. The trails were a different situation. This is another way that level of service gets calculated. You don't have much in the way of trails today. You've got about little over 2 miles of trails existing. The trails plan would result in about 91 miles of trails, far more than you've got now. So we didn't want to take 2 miles and project that forward. We said, well, by 2035, 20 years from now, we want 91 miles of trails. And so we back that up into a level of service. Now that also means you have a shortfall right now. And as you'll see, we have a shortfall in just about all of the parks and recreation facilities based on the level of service. The bottom table on that sheet, you see how we calculate several things. We have the current inventory. What have you got today in acres of parks, number of baseball fields, miles of multi-use trails? Using the level of service, we can calculate what should you have right now for the existing population. And by and large, you see excess or shortfall in that column. You can see that you need to buy some acres and you need to build some facilities or portions of facilities to serve the existing population to meet your level of service. Then on top of that, future growth will have demands for new facilities to serve them and maintain that level of service for everybody over the 20 years. So we end up adding the existing shortfall plus what you need for the future folks into a grand total. We have to round that out to even numbers. You can only build one ball field. You can't build a half a ball field. And then what happens is, of those facilities that need to be built or those acres that need to be purchased, new growth will be responsible for a portion of that cost. The existing tax base, the existing folks who are here, will be responsible for paying for their share. So it all boils down to fair share between who owes what on these facilities. And you can see that last column there are various percentages of the extent to which these facilities would be impact fee eligible versus need to be paid for from other revenue or revenue other than impact fees. The next table summarizes all of this. Now, I'm skipping over a bunch of tables in this report so that a lot of the detail, the transition is in the report, but it's not in this briefing paper. I'll spend a little extra time on this first one because there are several concepts to speak to. The big table on this next page summarizes the whole level of service, how many facilities are needed, the costs of those facilities, how much of these costs are impact fee eligible, to come up with the new growth share. And remember, where we're going is that ultimately we will calculate the maximum impact fee that you can charge. The reason we do that is because the law says you can't charge new growth and development more than their fair share. So the question is, when do you get to more? Anything more than the maximum. Now, when you get the methodology report that has these calculations in it, we're not recommending necessarily that you adopt the full maximum impact fee or something less, but you just need to know the ceiling that you can't go over in looking at the fee structure. Let me spend just a little time on the last column, net present value. The impact fee law requires that all of these dollar calculations be done in what's called present value, which doesn't necessarily mean what it's going to cost you in 2014 or 2015. And the way these are done is you take the 2014 cost, you inflate it into the future. Whatever year you think you're going to build something, buy something, need something, you inflate that cost to that year, and then you deflate it using what's called the discount rate. And there's a lot of explanation about how these calculations are made. There are three inflation rates that are used. One is the CPI, when you're only talking about value of money. Engineering News Record has a separate inflation rate for what it actually costs or it has been costing to construct buildings and for other kinds of construction projects. So we use these different inflation rates depending on what kind of facility that we're talking about. The discount rate is what you can otherwise get in savings, in interest of money sitting in the bank. And 1% is about, you're really doing well if you're making 1% on your money just sitting in the bank these days. So that's the discount rate that we use. We also, I should also mention, none of the, you may have noticed that none of the footnotes are on these tables. We took the cost estimate for projects and we added 15% contingency and 7% for architecture and engineering services, so that you'll see this column, this gross cost column, includes these additional costs that you're going to experience over and beyond what the basic cost estimate was on those projects. Fire protection is a little bit easier. With regard to fire protection, basically, with regard to the square feet in the fire stations, with regard to the fire trucks and general vehicles, we base that level of service on what do you have now in your inventory to serve the people who are here. Now, we're using the day-night population here because it's a 24-hour service. We add the number of residents and the number of employees together because the fire department's got to protect your house whether you're home or not, got to protect that business whether it's open for business or not. For those three categories, we took the existing level of service and projected that forward with regard to how much you will need in the future for new vehicles and square footage. The one exception is this last one, the emergency warning sirens. You've already put them out there. You bought 10 and installed them throughout the city. And they're positioned such that you won't have to add more sirens to the system. They cover the areas where growth is going to occur. But obviously, these sirens will be serving populations that aren't here yet, new growth. So instead of using the existing level of service, take 10 sirens and say, well, by 2035 we need 15 sirens. That's not the case. You'll still only need 10 sirens in 2035. So we went out to 2035, divided that number by the 2035 day-night population to get a level of service. When you back that up, about 4 of the sirens you put out there, the cost of a little over 4 sirens is actually impact fee eligible because they will be you've spent the money and you will recover it in future impact fees as people move into the city.
I have a question on that. So do we need to take a census of our city to be able to determine that the people actually moved here so that we can retroactively pay ourselves back on the sirens?
Well, you'll be charging folks as they move in. At least with regard to the population, we're saying 2035. That's all you're ever going to get. You're built out in 2035. There are several rules about making projections. I may have mentioned these to you before. Rule number 1 is don't do it because you're going to be wrong. Rule number 2 is if you have to do it on the graph, don't put any years on the bottom. If you have to put the years, as we do, then don't be here when you get to the end because you're going to be wrong. With regard to population, you may grow faster, you may grow more slowly, but you're going to run out of land at some point. With regard to employment, we like the projections we have, but we may be off. Bear in mind that you will need to update this whole capital improvements element, this whole impact fee program, about every 5 years. When you update your comprehensive plan, the comprehensive plan now calls for a chapter. Anybody who has impact fees, they have to have a chapter on their impact fees in the report. So although your upcoming, was you about 2 years out, Kathy, from the comprehensive plan update? Yeah, in 2016, all we'll do is take this capital improvements element that comes out of this process and just put it in the comprehensive plan. 5 years later, you'll need to redo it. Unless things just really turn very different, you may need to update it sooner, but at least every 5 years you go back, you revisit. Are we growing like we said? Do we still need the facilities like we said?
So maybe worded a different way, lacking official results from the U.S. Census every 10 years. Does the state just go along with our projections, lacking any census data? I think Matt's point was we could make up some really good numbers so that we could get paid back quicker. How do we get certified the projections that we're going to use for these fees?
Keep track of your building permits. You know how many houses are getting built out there, and you can apply your own average household size with regard to population. You can also look at new non-residential construction, and there are some guidelines you can use for how many employees on average are probably in
So they
there.
don't mind us keeping track of it ourselves.
Yeah, that's about
good to know.
Because now the Board of Education also turns out some interesting household data and whatnot. So there are a number of sources, but you won't have to rely on the state. They'll be even more wrong than I am. I promise you that.
Correct.
I mean, look at your share of the statewide sales tax. Be that as it may, yes, these numbers are great for today. In 5 years from now, they're going to be out of date, and you're going to need to look at them. Now, one of the things about impact fees is they're sort of self-regulating because they're based on building permits getting issued. If growth occurs a lot faster than is anticipated, you'll need the facilities to serve new growth sooner, but you're also collecting the impact fees faster. And the opposite is the case. If we have another recession or whatever, things really slow down, you don't need those facilities as quickly to serve new growth because the new growth just isn't occurring. And so, but you're not getting the impact fees either. So it kind of self-regulates over time. And we're going to talk a little bit more about financing when we get to the end. The other pages, police services, are next. We looked at the square footage that's currently occupied by the police department, what that level of service generated in terms of future number of square feet that could be impact fee eligible, came up with what that percentage was, and excuse me. And basically, the way this is structured, this is the type of impact fee where you just project what have you got, and therefore what do you need in the future based on that level of service. And the net result is that you don't need, no, let me rephrase that. You can't justify all of the square feet that will be built in the new building under this approach. In fact, well, I didn't check. I'm not keeping up. On this column, you'll note on this table on the right-hand side, you'll see that by the time we get to the 8,500 square foot new headquarters building, only 39% of that would be impact fee eligible. And the reason for that is that the level of service today, based on the square footage they occupy, projected forward, does not produce enough square footage to cover the entire building. I was talking to Kathy earlier. There's another way to look at this, and I have not done these calculations. The other way is to say by the year 2035, when we already know or we're projecting that population is going to be at its end by that time, we can say that by that point in time, the city is going to need an 8,500 square foot headquarters building and some square footage and storage, on-site and off-site storage. In other words, these numbers. And then we can back that up. And we can say, just very much like we did with the trails in the Parks and Recreation, we say, well, in 2035, we need all of this. Between now and 2035, what's the share, the fair share for new growth and development to pay for versus the existing folks, and see what that percentage. Sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't, and we just haven't run those numbers. But I'm going to run those numbers, and whichever way comes out the most beneficial to the city is the ones that we will put in the methodology report, which is the next report coming out. And all of these end up with a net present value calculation based on the years that we anticipate the facilities. Roads are a whole nother story. The the way we came at road improvements was first, with the help of Public Works and the transportation engineer, first we started off with all of the projects, road improvement projects, that you have currently planned in adopted plans in the capital improvements plan, in regional plans, as well as some projects that have come up, as I understand it. Some of those actually create capacity. We can't pay for maintenance. We can't pay for things, filling potholes, but we can include in the impact fee program any road improvement that actually increases capacity, because it's capacity to deal with new growth that the impact fee is based on. Now, the way we calculated this is we looked at how many trips, how much traffic is out there on the roads generated by existing development today. When I say existing development, it's city residents and city businesses. The second question is, how much is going to be out there in 2035 when the population and the employment forecasts are realized? And that came out to about 40%. I think it's 40.1% of the total. Yeah. That's how much more traffic you're going to have on your roads, and therefore future growth and development, their fair share is to pay 40.1% of the cost of these road improvements that are creating new capacity. The wrinkle here is that while the state law requires you to adopt a level of service, we're recommending that you adopt the so-called level of service D. This is the level of service just about everybody in the state has adopted. But you're not necessarily going to achieve level of service D on every one of these improvements. In fact, in many cases, you're going to make things better, but you may still be level of service F when you get through, but you in fact are handling more traffic. So we've characterized the level of service D as the level of service that you will strive for, but not necessarily achieve on each and every project. But the basic point is that these, whether it's a intersection improvement, a signalization improvement, or a road widening, you're creating capacity for more traffic. And that more traffic is new growth and development. Now, we have left out, somebody say, well, how about all the rest of those cars out there? We've left out all of the cross commutes, the people who just drive through the city, because we've also left out all state and federal funding. And we've made the general theory that you're getting those grants and assistance because that's the money that's paying for the improvements needed for these people who don't even live here. And so we can focus in on just the city traffic and the increase in city traffic compared to the money that the city has to pay toward or for these road improvements. And that's how we balance that out. So the table here lists all of the projects that have been identified that are capacity related. There are other projects, other road projects you have planned that are not eligible. They don't create capacity, they just help the situation, if you will. And I do want to emphasize that the state law says road improvements. It doesn't say transportation, it doesn't say anything else. It says roads. Now you can include whatever landscaping, signalization, sidewalks, you can include curb and gutter, you can include everything in the cost of a road improvement. The bottom line is you have to be improving a road and creating capacity regardless of what else is hooked on to that project. So that's where we're coming from on roads. The last road table summarizes new growth cost versus the totals. And here you can see when we add up all of these road improvements in net present value, you've got about $38 million of just these capacity-related roads. Of those, that 40.1% ends up being $15 million that could be included in an impact fee. The summary table puts all of this together in terms of what is the level of service standard in general terms that we're using. What's the total cost of all of these all of these projects in 2014 dollars? Of that, how much of it is potentially impact fee eligible? And again, that net present value calculation of how much money do we actually have to schedule to be available when we get around to doing all of these projects at a future time. The last table is next steps, and the steps that are labeled here are also sort of summarized on the drawing. Excuse me. First step, of course, is to get your concurrence that we should proceed with the impact fee study. And once you do that, then you will officially be beginning the impact fee process, because that's when we then sit down, calculate what the impact fees could be, get into the heavy-duty calculations. As such, you're going to need to hold a public hearing to kick off the process. That's a requirement of any amendment to the comprehensive plan, and your ultimate capital improvements element is an amendment to your comprehensive plan. So we have to follow the comprehensive plan amending process in the DCA's regulations. We will then be drafting an impact fee methodology report. And on the drawing, the upper left-hand group of squares kind of summarizes the methodology report. We do the forecast, which of course we've already done. We list all the projects, which of course we've already done in the assessment report. And importantly, now we calculate what can the maximum impact fees be. This document sort of becomes the Bible for calculating and controlling your impact fee program over the future years. From that methodology report, and let me say that I want to thank the advisory committee for being so patient, waiting for us to actually use them for something meaningful. This is where they roll up their sleeves and really go to work. So it's coming, guys. We're going to sit down with the heavy-duty stuff pretty quick with you. The forecasts and the projects go into what's called the capital improvements element. It's called an element because that's what DCA calls all the chapters in a comprehensive plan. They're elements. But only a portion of what's in the methodology report is needed for the capital improvements element. DCA is not interested in your fee calculations. There's nothing in what you have to do is say, here are our future needs, and here are what we're going to do about them. So these first two categories out of the methodology report, the forecast and the projects, go into the CIE. After the advisory committee and we have worked and finalized that methodology report, it'll come to you for discussion and adoption. Once it is adopted, then we put together the capital improvements element using those portions of the methodology report, and then we have another public hearing, and that's a public hearing to, of course, gain public comment and to adopt a transmittal resolution. At that point in time, you are not adopting the capital improvements element. You're only authorizing that it go to DCA. First it goes to ARC, then they send it to DCA for review. So it's a draft. And That will be sent off once you pass the transmittal resolution. It just authorizes that it go forward for review. While that review is going on, then we return to, we start on the impact fee ordinance, and most especially, of course, the impact fee schedule that will go into that ordinance. So here again, as we draft that ordinance, the advisory committee gets very much involved in that, in looking at the kinds of recommendations, the provision. There are a lot of provisions that have to be there to meet state law, but there are some variations that we can talk about, as well as what should the impact fees be? Are the maximums recommended to you? Are some other level recommended to you? These recommendations come to you for review. Meanwhile, as they say, the Lone Ranger back at the ranch didn't know that Tonto, dressed as a woman, whatever. Meanwhile, while that review process is going on, we come forward with the draft ordinance for your review and discussion. And I think that takes two hearings, 2 readings to be adopted. So at any rate, here again, and you can see that these maximum impact fees in my little drawing out of the methodology report, they build into deciding what fee schedule you want to adopt. The maximum, not the maximum for some categories, but not in others. That will be a lot of discussion that we end up having, and we'll have the input from the advisory committee on that. Once the ARC review is completed, and it varies. Sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's 2 months. It takes a little while for them to come back with their findings. But at that point, if we're diligent, we will be able to coordinate the adoption of the impact fee ordinance and fee schedule and the adoption of the CIE as an amendment to the comprehensive plan simultaneously. If we're not diligent, we have to do them separately, but hopefully that we can get everything organized to do those together. Not on my chart. We'll be working with staff, training folks. How do you collect these things? How do you calculate impact fees? When do you do it? There's a lot of things in there about appeals, about exemptions, refunds. There's a lot of administrative stuff that goes into running these programs. So we will be working with staff on understanding how that all works so that when you adopt the ordinance, they can start collecting the next day if you authorize them to start the next day. You can authorize them to start at any point, but they will be prepared to implement this program at that time.
Karen?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. You should.
Yeah, go
yes.
ahead, Karen.
As far as the impact fees go, once the fee schedule is adopted, is it the same amount charged for all single-family residentials, or is it based on square footage? Is it based on number of bedrooms? How is that determined?
An impact fee for a residence is based on it being a housing unit. It's the same fee, whether it's a single-family house or a townhouse or an apartment. It's the same fee. Because we have to maintain what's called a rational nexus.
Right.
If the city attorney was here, he could explain that better than I. But the bottom line is that there has to be a relationship between the fee we charge and the service we provide.
Right.
And there's no relationship, for instance, between the size of a house and the services they provide. Bigger houses don't need more fire stations. Bigger houses don't need more parks. So with regard to residences, basically the rational nexus is just it's a housing unit. It may have 2 people in it. It may have 12 people in it. Families change over time, but housing unit is the basic level of service.
And in the cities around here that have impact fee ordinances, what would be the typical impact fee, not the maximum, but the one that's adopted for like a single family home?
We're redoing Alpharetta's right now. I'm not sure what they currently charge. Roswell was the grand total impact fee for all services that they provide in their impact fees plan for residences was somewhere in the 2000s, I think, $2,000, $2,500. Is that? Yeah.
Okay.
Bert? Going back to the questions that were asked earlier about the forecast, specifically the population, all that is flushed out in the methodology report and DCA. When they look at it, they're all saying, okay, we see how you got to this 61,000 in 2035. That's where if we were going to be outlandish and say 100,000, they'd say, how did you get there? And that's how you keep that in check. Is that, or is that kept in check?
They don't even really go that deeply into it. The only thing that ARC and DCA will review is whether or not we've complied with the law and their standards with regard to the items addressed. Did we address future need, and based on whatever population and employment projections we use, did we have a plan to address those needs? It's very, very simple, but the ARC process, the ARC process is one of coordination. They will send a copy of your community capital improvement element to all, quote, affected governments, unquote, basically everybody around you. And they will invite comment. And they will have a public hearing to which nobody ever goes. It's just part of the process to see if they get any comments. So ARC per se not only will handle the review process along with DCA, they also have the opportunity to comment. They, of all of the cities and counties in the metro area that they have reviewed CIEs on, they've never commented on any of them. And I doubt they would comment on our population and employment forecast, since theirs are so wrong that they have to assume we're right.
So so it's self-policed, basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and they have to be reasonable,
Sure,
of course.
certainly.
Yeah. But that's our defense. And I should add, everything I do is all about how to explain this to a judge. I mean, it's kind of a cynical way of looking at it. But the bottom line is, if you end up in court on anything about impact fees, we have to be able to explain to a judge how you comply with all laws and requirements. And questions about those projections certainly could be brought up.
So even in 2035, we're not at that 61,000 number, but we've made a good faith effort of assuming that's going to be the population.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have any issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you don't get to that population until 2040, you're only charging new growth as it occurs. So when you get to 2035, you've only charged however many people, how many houses did get built. And you can continue your impact fee until you collect all of the money that's the fair share of that 61,000 people.
Gotcha. Thank you.
A couple questions.
Go ahead, Matt.
And Bill, this isn't for you, it's for our staff and our committee. But a lot of information, a lot of good information here. Procedurally, it seems like there's a lot of process involved in our department heads. I just want to hear from you. Is this manageable, looking at all these forecasts? And are we changing our procedures at all as we look at impact fees in our day-to-day operations? Would we have to, Kathy, maybe this is for you, would this be something we'd have to add personnel or anything like that to be able to maintain all this? How easy would it be to assimilate?
Well, I can start. Even though I'm not one of the departments for which you're going to be collecting impact fees, but in terms of the administration of it, the administration would come through us, because we would collect the impact fees at the time of the that the building permit was issued. And I did this in Roswell and actually worked with Bill Ross and his firm at that point too. And what we would get would be a software that you would punch in, because if for residential it is just one house, but if you've got a commercial building, you have to look at how many employees are going to be generated, because those employees are going to use the roads, for instance. So you have to know what the square footage is, and you have to know what the type of use is. Is it a nail salon or is it a restaurant? Because they're going to generate different types of visitors and employees. And so you have a whole software, and you just really sort of plug in all that basic data, and it spills out to you what the cost is for the impact fee. So from an administration point of view, it's very minimal in terms of what would be needed. It's just one more fee that's collected up front, and that's really how we would approach it.
So implementation is easy, just all we need to do is make an investment into software.
Well, I think that comes with
We're going to give her the software.
it comes
That's-
with
okay,
it
our-
comes
what
with
we've
the
already done.
contract.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, just want to make sure that was
Yes,
understood.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
So we would need to hire any additional personnel or anything? as
Absolutely
far
not.
as-
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, let me embroider on that, because I think the question was broader. The bad news is that impact fees can only be used for capital improvements, and those capital improvements have to have a life of at least 10 years. So we can't do computers, we can't do patrol cars, and we can't do maintenance or administration. When we build a new fire station, the people in there running it and the computers and the furniture aren't part of the fee.
Right.
On the good news side, what's in this assessment report are drawn from plans you already have, for instance, recreation plans and whatnot, plans you already have for fire stations and the police headquarters, and the roads are all on your road improvement list. Whether you had impact fees or not, you would have to pay. Well, if you didn't have impact fees, you'd be still paying for all the additional staff, the equipment, et cetera, to go with the improvements. The difference is you wouldn't be collecting a fee toward paying the capital side of it.
Okay. Thank you. And then my next committee for you guys, I guess what have you done in the process so far? Have you been in agreement and everything that they've said tonight? And yes, no?
Well, he's done most of the work so far.
Right.
We had one meeting before this, and he just explained how the process was going to work.
Okay.
And now he did some calculations, and now this is the calculations. So we spoke a little bit at the first meeting, we gave some input, but it looks like here we're going to have some more input, more of our input
Right.
come up in these next meetings. Am I correct?
That's correct. That's correct. This report is very much what the city already has adopted.
Sure.
And we didn't need to go back and revisit the Parks and Recreation Plan and that sort of thing. But the real value of the advisory committee is going to be when we start calculating the fees and start looking at how do we go about paying for all of this. And that's kind of a leave behind question for me to you. How are you going to pay for all of this? Of all these capital improvements in this assessment report that we've identified, only about a half are actually impact fee eligible. So we will be in discussions with the city manager, the finance department, and you ultimately of how do we finance all of this, all of these improvements. Quite often you also have to remember that you don't collect the last impact fee until the last house is built or the last business moves in. You often need those improvements much sooner than all the money comes in. So things like a bond issue, just general fund financing, pay as you go, other kinds of debt instruments, we need to look at those. We will prepare the methodology report in such a way that it's rather conservative anyway. If you can never tell me in the months to come how you intend to finance these improvements, it's okay from my standpoint, because we will be using a credit calculation against the general fund. That's the most conservative kind of credit for future tax collections that that we can do. If you may recall, Alpharetta was the first city in the state to have impact fees, and they passed a bond issue and impact fees simultaneously so that they could build the bond financing. The interest you pay on bonds is an impact fee eligible expense.
Okay.
On the other hand, new growth and development is also going to be paying that tax to pay off the bonds for facilities they're not responsible for, so they get a credit back for that. But if we only do the simple credit approach, it's conservative. We can guarantee that you won't have crossed that line into beyond a fair share. But to the extent that we can actually combine a realistic funding approach in the plan, it's better and it's more complete. But I think that you will have to wrestle with the idea that you're going to need money to pay for some capital improvements before you actually collect the impact fees to help pay for it. And this is especially true for services like fire. You don't wait until the last house is built before you put a fire station there. That's too late. You've got to anticipate that growth and be buying fire trucks and improving the stations ahead of the growth so that you're there and you're ready. You got to serve even a small population before you serve everybody. So it's a timing issue that you will have to deal with. We will be talking to the advisory committee also about how to deal with this issue.
Yeah.
I guess how deep do we go when we're determining the impact fee schedule? Do you have a impact fee portion that's for parks, or you have to go down to the individual playground equipment? Or do you do it for roads? Or, I mean, what level do you go to?
The impact fee schedule will break out the 4 categories.
Okay, so it'll be just the category schedule.
Yeah, but then there'll be a list of land uses. Parks and Recreation will only be charged against residential development because non-residential use of parks is not very great, and we don't keep records of it. The other 3 categories will be charged for residential and non-residential development. And you'll find the land use that you want your building permit for, and you go across and it'll tell you what's the fee per square foot, for instance, on a grocery store. However many feet you're about to build in your grocery store times that fee, that per square foot fee will tell you what the impact fee for that use
So
that
for
use is.
commercial and office and things, it is based on square footage, but residential, it's just based on housing unit.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. With rare exception. Motel is per room.
That makes sense.
Vast majority of them are by square foot, yeah.
On the residential side, is that typically charged to the developer when he comes in? He's got 15 lots and it's charged at that, or is it charged per individual house as it's built?
It cannot be charged under the law. It cannot be charged earlier than when the building permit is applied for. Now, some jurisdictions have delayed collection. You can pay the impact fee when you pull your building permit, or you can delay, but it has to be paid before the certificate of occupancy is issued. And various cities and counties have had mixed results. The developers usually ask for that opportunity, and then they never take advantage of it because they realize that takes 2 trips down here to pay money, and they still haven't. They were hoping that they could get the certificate of occupancy first, close on the house, get all the money, and then pay the fee. Well, they can't do it. Once you issue the CO, you've got no recourse. So you have to collect it before that anyway. So some may take advantage of it, some may not. You may or may not even put that in your ordinance. It's strictly up to you. But it can't be collected before the building permit is issued.
Anybody else? Yes.
Just in general, it seems to me with whether or not we do the impact fee or not, it seems like it might address some of, as a resident, some of the residents' concerns about all this new building and all these new people coming in. As you know, that's a big concern for many residents. Oh, it's going to be so much more traffic. It's going to be, I don't think that people think of fire as much, but they would if they were told, if they were told to think about that. But I think it might allay some of the fears of the people that already live here, saying, well, these new people are going to be charged a fee, so you're not going to have to foot all the costs for all the new roads and everything like that. So it might allay the fear of the people that live here now to help them deal with all the new, at least housing units that are coming in and possibly commercial buildings that will be, just from a residential point of view.
So you would be comfortable with our authorizing proceeding?
Excuse me?
Our next step would be authorizing the proceeding of the impact fee study, and you would be comfortable with our doing that?
Well, I would, but.
Yes. Right, just checking.
I mean, and I think also, as the builders, and I think the builders may not be as happy to do it because it's an extra fee that's going to be put on them. But if it's something that when you sell, for houses this is, when you sell a house, if you say, well, this is, a fee that's charged by the city, builders, I used to work for a car dealership, the attorney for the car dealership, and they hated to put it in the price of their car, so they would put it as a separate line item at the very end, say, hey, this is not us, this is the city's impact fee that you gotta pay, so that's an extra thing on the line item way at the end after we talk about the price of your house. That helps the builder in that it doesn't look like, well, this house is now an extra $2,000 or whatever. That's a city fee. And for someone that's moving into the city from somewhere else, since this is a city where lots of people want to move into, it's like, all right, well, I really want to live in Milton. All right, I'll just take, it'll be all right, I'll pay that extra $2,000. I mean, that could help the builders in talking about that extra fee that they have to charge.
Yeah, I think the impetus for us on getting into this, understanding what impact fees are, how they could be used, the benefit to the city, that kind of thing, came about when we were discussing the fee schedule in general. So a year ago, we started talking about, what do we charge for this? What do we charge for that? How did we come up with these fees? Did we just pluck numbers out of the air? I think this whole concept brings a level of objectivity and understanding to what is this money actually being paid for. I mean, if you follow everything that gets laid out and how you get to these numbers, you really see, oh, well, we're charging what it's going to cost the city to provide services, and I think that makes a lot of sense. It can be confusing, certainly. There's an exhaustive amount of work that's been going into the paper itself, but I think it ultimately makes a lot of sense. So, all right, anything else?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, Kathy tells me that this doesn't really need an official vote to proceed unless you want to. I told her a nod and a wink would be concurrence, or you can say, no, Ross, wait a minute, we want to talk about this more. So whichever way you want me to go.
Well, this is as a just work session. We can't vote on anything.
Understand.
I think that we can go around everybody and find out what their ideas on about proceeding, but if we require a vote, or if we want to take a vote, it'll have to wait for the next meeting.
Understand.
If not, I'd let everybody just weigh in on what their preference is right now. So
Ready to move forward.
I'm okay proceeding.
I would agree with that.
Same.
I'll take that as a nod and a wink.
Yep.
Thank you.
Before you wrap up, question/comment. On each one of these different sectors that you're kind of analyzing, the parks, recreation, traffic, etc. For instance, the one that's road improvements, when you get down to the amount that is utilized for an impact fee, then you utilize the 40.1%, which is the population growth percentage, in order to move that cost forward. Is that right?
Well, you're very close. On that table, I pulled out the table back up. Total cost for roads is $31,753,000. 40.1% of that has already been taken. So the $12,735,000. That's the 40% that's actually eligible, and then we'll take that amount that's eligible and basically divide it by all of the vehicle trips out there to come up with a per trip expense. Yeah.
Okay, but specifically, this one's based on what the new traffic is, what the new population growth is.
Yes.
Whereas if you look at our parks and recreation spreadsheet there, it takes into account what our current needs are and subtracts basically what we haven't built yet out of those numbers.
Yes, sir.
And where I'm going with this is, for instance, if you look at this, your page 5, it shows us there what our percent impact fee eligible is, and there's varying percentages there, which it shows there. And essentially, as a city right now, we're leaving a lot of money on the table that we literally can't charge as impact fees because we haven't built that yet. And the reason why I'm saying that is because these are, on this particular page there, 5 of our largest numbers anywhere are on this page. And when you talk about having a bond referendum, for instance, it would behoove us to fund these things at that time and then be able to charge an impact fee rather than not be able to charge impact fee for these things that may never get built. We don't collect the money on.
Well, these amounts of money on page 5, for instance, it's not low because we haven't built them yet. It's low because we need to be providing playgrounds and basketball courts and buying more parkland partially to serve the people who are here right now. These percentages are how much more do we have to do beyond serving the existing population in order to also serve the future population at the same level of service. So the fact that these are based on the plans and the adopted level of service standards of Parks and Recreation and the Conservation Plan and the Trails Plan, we can start charging an impact fee now just for the share that new growth is responsible for.
So we can't charge future residents to get us where we really should be now for the current residents.
That's correct. That's correct. So if you wanted to consider a bond, I'm not recommending that you issue a bond, but if you wanted to consider bond financing to cover, you would really, the bond would cover probably all of the cost. And then a portion of that bond would be the money used for new growth. You'd also have money in the bond to pay for the facilities for existing growth, so that you're covering the future growth share out of that bond issue and building those facilities probably, well, at any rate, you're building those facilities out of the bond proceeds. Meanwhile, as new growth occurs, people move in, they start paying their property taxes. Some of that property tax is going to be for paying off the bonds for that part of the bond that's building a facility for the existing folks. And they're not responsible for that. So then we calculate a credit against those taxes. Because remember, the formula, if you will, is new growth and development cannot be charged more than their fair share. First and foremost, what are they paying in taxes that will pay for their fair share? So what they end up paying in an impact fee is net of what they're going to be paying for taxes anyway. So, and you'll see in the calculations in the assessment report, that last little table will say, well, what's the credit that that new growth gets, because they're going to be paying taxes for stuff that either they are eligible for and they're paying taxes for that, or especially they're paying taxes for facilities they're not responsible for.
And your software does all these calculations?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Anything else?
Mr. Ross, I have a question. When you use the information here for conservation easements, I'm just wondering what numbers that you use for that, because I know that's something that the council is talking about right now, is talking about doing conservation easements. Do these numbers include what you guys are talking about right now? Do you know? Or?
These numbers came out of the conservation plan. It's 2,500 acres of conservation easements for conservation, and it's 100 acres of land for trails.
Is that
So
something-
those are.
I guess I'm just wondering if these numbers are correct still with what you all will be talking about.
as far as I know, they jive with exactly what we're talking
Yeah.
about. So, yeah.
Now, and bear in mind that the conservation plan is different from the conservation subdivision that's being discussed right now. The conservation subdivision will allow people to put open space in their development and have smaller lots. Yeah. And that's their problem. That's their business, because they're providing this conservation area for their own residents and development. But these numbers are apart from the land that would be gained in conservation from conservation subdivisions. This is I think 2,500 acres was to be purchased, but there's another like 10,000 acres total with some donations, or I think the conservation plan anticipated some donations.
Yeah, I was
in
going to
addition.
say that's an awful lot of
That's
acres.
too many acres for the city.
That's,
That might be
I
another
just pulled
city.
that number
Yeah.
out of the air, but
Yeah.
but this includes these numbers include only the acres that are in your conservation plan, bearing in mind that the conservation plan goes to 2030. So we did have to calculate, well, how much, a little bit more do we need by 2035 to maintain that same ratio?
Yep. All right. Any additional council discussion? No, we're good. Any other questions? I appreciate you guys coming and helping us out tonight. All right. Well, thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.